Okay, well, welcome to the week 3. You made it. Okay, so for today, I'm gonna try and keep it short and sweet, or at least as short and sweet as I can. I try not. I have a tendency to over talk things, so I don't want to lose you necessarily. But I did want to make a short video to introduce because we're going to be getting a little bit hot and heavy with some of the more material that not that Plato was easy, but um, mostly it just had to do with the archaic language. I think the actual ideas were pretty straightforward because they've been fairly influential in a lot of ways. And this week, this so you've probably heard a lot of the similar ideas in other forms. So it probably wasn't too hard to grasp once you were able to get sort of that image, that visual in mind. Um, but once we get in, now that we're getting into a little deeper waters language-wise and idea-wise, I'm hoping that after you read it, after you read the Carl Jung, for example, and maybe some of the material on mind, um, it may be a little bit confusing at first because of the language, but ultimately the ideas are similar to last week's in the sense that that once you grasp the idea and sort of the image of it, it's a little easier to understand. So I'm just making a short little introduction to sort of reassure you of that. Because the first reading for the week, other than like that little introduction to the mind that I reference in the module above, is Carl Jung, The Personal and Collective. I think it's unconscious. I think he included that word too. It's philosophical language, but it's really just sort of a foundational element so that we can move on to the exercise that it's going to be following up at the end of the week with the Joseph Campbell, which is going to be your first short essay. And I think Joseph Campbell is a little easier on the ears than Jung, although they both work with very similar contexts. They Campbell borrowed from Jung a lot, but he tended to work in terms of storytelling and pop culture, which is what I like about him. He introduces the idea of storytelling, and since I was a fiction writer at one point, nothing you'd probably ever heard of, mostly just stories and stuff. And I got my MFA, which is a fine arts, and degree, which is about writing, which is a terminal degree in writing. And I also got an undergraduate philosophy degree at Davis. So this kind of bridges that gap, and I'm hoping that Campbell's emphasis on pop culture, at least for the time at the time that he was writing, makes it much more accessible. And I promise you, even when the language gets a little heavy at times, just plow through it, and I think the tasks themselves are going to be a lot easier for you to do in the context of just using what the deeper material tries to do as a background. If that makes any sense. So in other words, don't be scared off by any of the language. Just plow through it as best you can. I'll follow up myself, and then I'll ask you to follow up, and then you'll be reading some of your classmates' responses, and at the very least in the discussion board to see how everybody's understanding it, and just a reminder maybe is that I'm not always looking for the expert answer. Okay, however you can understand it is probably not going to be too far off base as long as you're sincere about how you're responding to things. Um, so don't ever worry that you don't have anything like super smart to say. Just understand it as a reader. Okay, this is my continual reminder through the semester that as a reader you are an expert at your own reading. Right? You can say, well, I didn't understand this. Right? Even telling me maybe why you may not have understood it. Maybe a certain section. I may even ask you to do that. It's like what parts were kind of hard to grasp, and what connections didn't quite seem to go together, and then I can sometimes take that off as a jumping point. Or other times you may just understand perfectly well certain aspects of it, and that's the level that you understand it as, right? That makes you an expert in your own reading, right? You understand what you understand, and what you don't understand. The only thing I ask is that you engage in a little bit of intellectual curiosity. That's the critical reading, critical thinking that we worked on the first, pretty much from the get go. And having a grasp of that is probably a lot. not probably, it's actually a lot better in the context of this class because I'm not judging you, okay? At least, you know, I don't know, in a grade sense, I guess I am, but I'm not judging your intellectual acumen, right? You know, whether you're smart enough to understand anything I have to say, right? Hopefully, I'm saying stuff that isn't just talking to myself, right? And I would invite you. My default position is to invite you into the conversation. Okay, so if you have places where you can go there and start there, and then we'll see if we can engage that little that moment of sort of clarity or understanding along the way. For others of you, this may just be pretty maybe not accurate, right? Maybe most of it. My experience is that most people tend to understand a whole lot more than they think they do. And then as a follow up, I just sort of try to reassure you guys and gals and everybody that there is a place to go no matter where you're at. Okay, that's the best way I could put it. Okay, so try and plow through this as best you can, follow up as best you can, and then hopefully we'll provide some clarity in the discussion board, and I can follow up even in 108, in the sort of the live sessions, and see kind of where people are at. Okay, so the first page that above here is just a sequence that you're going to be seeing, and I hope to see you a little bit later. Okay, thanks.